Welcome to Between the Lines. I'm Urszula Gacek, and my guest today is Professor Danuta Hübner, Polish economist, European policy expert, notably Poland's first commissioner to the European Commission in 2004, so many years ago. She later served as a member of the European Parliament, but has remained active in the debate on Europe's political direction, enlargement and future of the European Union, and also a member of Team Europe Direct, one of the European Commission's experts here in Warsaw. Professor, welcome to the programme. Countries that are net beneficiaries, like Poland, like Hungary, the countries that joined from Central and Eastern Europe in 2004, despite the real benefits of EU membership, are seeing a rise in far-right anti-EU sentiment. We see in Poland, for example, that Eurosceptics and actually openly anti-EU parties make up now for almost half of political support in Poland. What is Europe doing wrong? Is it policy? Is it how it's implemented? Or is it communication?
It's a very good question, I think. And also to understand what's going on in Poland, I hope you will agree with me that we have to see that this Euroscepticism, as you said, actually has been accompanying European Union integration from the day one, I would say. So it has always been with us. And when I was thinking many times about why we are skeptical with all the benefits that you just mentioned. And I think there is something wrong with us national politicians, as I used to be as well, that we like to play this famous blame game. So it's just we go to Brussels, we decide on important things together with other ministers, with other prime ministers, and then we come back home, we look at our political reality, and we think that we cannot just say that I decided because my people who are going to vote for me, hopefully, might not like it. So I say, again, Brussels decided on something that is not really good for us, and I voted, I was just against, and this kind of attitude, this is something which continues. And I think I think politicians have discovered, especially when the far right now emerged, that if they add this European skepticism to many other things, they don't like, people are worrying, people are concerned. So Europe just fits as something that can also build my political capital. So it's also used by, I think, politicians, which I think is dishonest, is not responsible. But
I think the best case of how to sell all the things that go wrong in your society and your economy is Brexit.
Absolutely.
That is a classic example that everything that for decades was a mistake of national governments was blamed on Brussels, and now Brussels no longer has a role to play. Things aren't that much better.
No, that's absolutely true. And additionally, I think when there was not much debate before the Brexit, before the referendum, but they never mentioned, the politicians, where are we going to go once we leave Union? So they were only promising to people that we will leave Union and the life will be better. So it was also dishonest, I would say. But you mentioned also communication, and I think that we don't know how to communicate. We just do permanently communication from Brussels. There are offices that organize very good communication, brochures, materials, and that we are doing there, while I think that, and we are not effective on this. And I think that the best thing would be to communicate Europe to people. It must be communication, not just information, but to do it, to have it done by local politicians, by a mayor who lives next street or whom I see.
And really grassroots, so that you can show people how this impacts. I think this is so often lacking. I mean, yes, people see those EU stars on bridges and railway stations, but it's really difficult to get the message across how it impacts their lives. And in a way, I think things are still relatively easy in Poland, because despite the statistics I gave at the beginning with the support for the Eurosceptics or the or the even openly Exiters, over 85% of Poles still actually see that the EU has benefits for them. But is that just viewed through a very monetary way? I mean, for the current perspective, the current budget, we're going to be beneficiaries, that's guaranteed. And then we have the next budget, which actually runs till 2034, but we're still going to be net beneficiaries. I don't want to go that far down the line, but I really worry when we have to start paying into that budget, how much more of a difficult message it is going to be to convey.
Yeah, but there's one more thing related to this negative or skeptical attitudes towards Europe, because it goes across Europe. But I think the important thing is that there are many public opinion polls done by Eurobarometer, which are very detailed, and there are a lot of questions about what people expect from Europe. And then you see that people expect a lot from Europe. So I think that's also the problem, that we just judge Europe as people, as, I don't know, political forces as well. We judge Europe not against what it really is, but against what is expected of it.
And our expectations are high.
Absolutely right. Now, for example, I am surprised to see that Eurobarometer did a couple of months, I think, this public opinion poll, and asked about people about security. And majority in Europe just want to be defended and protected not by national armies. They want to be protected by a European army.
In fact, yes,
they want to have more employment, and that's what they want from Europe. So,
but also hard security, because with the anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, since that time, actually security and this kind of hard security has been top of the agenda. But let's think about Ukraine. Ukrainians are overwhelmingly pro choosing an EU path. But it's going to take two to tango. Do you think, realistically, that in a document, I think in 2025, which painted, I think, a rather optimistic picture, not only for Ukraine, but for Moldova, Albania, Montenegro, talking of a perspective of 2030 for membership, that seems optimistic. Do you think that it's going to be a hard sell to European existing member states and their populations to accept a country as big as Ukraine? For now, I think, because it's a vague prospect, opinion isn't really attuned to this. But lobbies like farmers, for example, how are we going to sell Ukraine as a member to the old member states, in which I already include Poland?
Can I be critical about the word sell that you use?
Of course you can.
This communication or narrative as something that you have to sell is probably wrong approach. I think the narrative and debate should be a debate. Narrative should be a debate. So we should just really have discussions with people, and we should have a public debate, and that should be the selling exercise, not just politically but what I think in the context, what gets on my nerves sometimes in the context of Ukraine, discussion on Ukraine and with Ukrainians, that we forget that we have not started the dialogue with Ukraine in the context of the accession when the war came.
It goes back decades.
In 1994, we had the first partnership agreement between the European Union and Ukraine. And then I will never forget, in 2004, because we had a kind of task force. I don't know if it was formally or not, but it was between the foreign ministry. And within this task force, I had many discussions with the Ukrainians at that time, more than 20 years ago, that because they were saying, now there is a new Iron Curtain, a new kind of Berlin Wall with your accession, we are left alone. So I was always encouraging them, just work on it, get prepared, do everything that step by step, and once you are really ready, Europe will not be able to tell you no. So just be ready.
How far along? Because there are, to say it very simply, numerous boxes you have to tick. You know this so well because you are actually first-hand experience of Poland's accession to the European Union. So you know how many things that issues Poland had to address from its membership of the Council of Europe, first of all, to its fighting with potential corruption, numerous issues. Before the war, was Ukraine making progress along that list? Had that process stalled? Has it picked up speed? What is the current situation?
You mean before the 22?
Before the full-scale invasion?
Absolutely. No, absolutely, because Ukraine has already been through this association agreement. They have very deep, comprehensive, deep trade agreement with Europe. They are already, as of January, 1st January this year, they are in the European roaming system. So they have done a lot. And there is now also what is implemented by the Commission is this gradual integration, which is just bringing them in piece by piece wherever they can be ready.
So what kind of membership light?
No, I mean, that's a big issue because now I keep my fingers crossed that it doesn't happen. But when this idea of gradual integration was announced by the European Commission, Ukrainians were afraid that this will just take forever and we will be piece by piece
and they
joining
would get
the
some
European
kind of second-rate membership.
And we were all convincing them, no, it's just before you become, you will benefit already from some aspects of the single market, and roaming was, or the financial sector as well. But now I'm worrying, and I'm worrying what's going on with Europe, because Europe knows, we know in Europe that we must be also prepared, that Ukraine is not you cannot compare Ukraine with Montenegro. I'm sorry, I just take the extreme countries. But Ukraine cannot be just considered in terms of costs and benefits, which we normally have on both sides when we negotiate the membership, because Ukraine in the European Union is absolutely fundamental from the point of view of the security architecture for entire continent. Ukraine in the European Union, we see it now, it can be a huge contribution to what Europe needs, which is competitiveness of European economy, the power of European economy.
But we also see this fight, for example, for their rare metals. So also from a business point of view, Ukraine will open, especially in a period when the country will physically need to rebuild, it's going to open enormous markets. But apart from fears from like particular groups, I would think about farmers might be worried. Do you also think that the old Europe now sometimes looks at that large enlargement in 2004 and regrets letting us all in? Do they say these Hungarians, these Slovaks, until recently these Poles, they cause problems, they don't play by the rules. Have we actually, some of the Central and European states, by the way we have behaved as members, made it more difficult for Ukraine?
But there are people who say that, there are people who see it this way, but I also think that the majority does not, because the majority is fully aware, in terms of Europeans, ordinary European citizens, not only politicians, that they are fully aware how they benefited from this openness to the East, when the Eastern enlargement, each one is different, but that was exactly bringing of putting democracy on this bigger territory in Europe and globally.
It's unbelievable. I cannot imagine we have the climate to take on such an enormous challenge. When you think about 2004, how much optimism and the logistics of bringing in all of these member states was just...
there was a absolutely huge effort on both sides, definitely. And we had a treaty change as well before that. The Nice Treaty had to be changed. The Irish voted twice, if you remember. That was extremely difficult. But I also think that the surprise at the beginning for the European Union was that we didn't destroy the decision-making process. We didn't bring problems into the functioning of the European Union. So we were prepared, I think, and we were not worse than the old members at that time when it comes to the legislation, to respecting also everything. So I guess that's what we did not expect, not only the Europe, but we in Poland, we did not expect that after some years, that although, because we had also we had also opposition to the accession. The only of the 10 member states at that time, there was opposition in Poland. There were 2 political parties who were against the accession to the European Union. they forgot about it immediately the day after, if I can say it this way. But we didn't expect that part of the narrative of of those parties, it just stayed. It was black wolves hidden in the forest, and then some years later they just realized, some of the political parties here realized that they can, at adding European Union to the list of negative things that people like to hear, like abortion. There was this. So to create fears, Europe is probably a good toy for those politicians. So they used it, and that's why we also had, and we didn't react. I think European Union, the pro-European part of our society and political forces.
I think we dismissed some of these fears as well.
Absolutely.
But tell me, Professor, we've talked about Ukraine and how that is, because of its size, is going to be a real challenge. But let's go to another one of those countries on that 2025
challenge.
Moldova.
Size is also benefit.
Of course, it's an opportunity.
I just checked, some time ago I checked that if you don't take into account the overseas territories of France, then Ukraine will be the biggest territory-wise, will be the biggest member of the European Union.
So let's talk about a much smaller state. Let's talk about Moldova. They're also on that list. We have, since 2024, an openly pro-European president. Since 2025, again, we have a very openly pro-European government. They actually would love to be in the EU by 2028. Interestingly, a quarter or more of Moldovan citizens actually hold dual nationality. Romania has been their greatest supporter. They share a common language, a common culture, and many people in Moldova, especially younger generation, are joint EU/Romanian and Moldovan citizens. Could Moldova be an interesting test case to pursue Moldova first before Ukraine, or should we not take that kind of approach?
Yeah, well, you know that you joined the European Union on the basis of your own merits.
Yes.
So there is, I think, now in around Brussels, if I can call it this way, also in think tanks, because most of the discussion is taking place in the think tanks about the accession of Ukraine, Moldova, and the Western Balkans now. So they are just discussing this issue of another big bank, and I think there is no appetite among the member states. Plus, that would imply that some would have to wait for others to join. And
so
I think that it will be kind of regatta, as we used to call it. Yes. So those ready will be joining first. And Moldova last year in the 2025 report on the situation with the accession countries is very well kind of estimated by the European Commission. They are just a good student. Economically, they are very poor, but they are also 2 million people, 2.5, I think, million people. 1 million is already somewhere in the European Union. That would not be a big cost for European Union. So I think that...
And a substantial benefit, I think, in terms of also that
but
security.
Don't forget, because you also followed the three big events, referendum and the elections, the general and the presidential. So you know the scale and scope of the Russian interference in Moldova. It's just incredible, unprecedented, and still I think we won. We, the Europeans there, we won, and the elections are moving, didn't stop the path towards accession. But I think that still politically it's a very fragile location of the country, and the Transnistria issue, and this is so I hope that we will this will not become a problem, and Moldova can join when it's ready. I just trust, like we are talking
it is in
about
our interest to overcome that fragility by letting them make that progress as quickly as possible. But let me ask you something else, Professor. When we tell the potential new member states about the rule book they are going to be expected to follow, and this includes very clear guidelines on democracy and rule of law, and then we have old member states openly flouting and disregarding those rules. How credible are we in what we say?
Well, there is the risk, the credibility of enlargement, if I can just say that credibility of enlargement depends also on how long, on the length of the negotiations. We cannot have the permanent negotiations or permanent candidates like actually we have in the Western Balkans since summit in 20.
I mean, Turkey seems to be completely off the agenda.
60s, yeah. So we cannot have it. I always thought that Ukraine can do it in 4 years. There's no reason that Moldova would need more years. But I think that the fact that we have this option of blocking because of the system which was introduced, which is not based on the treaty at all, meaning that every small decision on financing of something small or moving within the negotiation to the next step requires unanimity from the member states. I think this is a huge kind of political
But it makes us also impotent in so many other areas, not just enlargement.
No, it's true,
I mean, we see this when we come to issues like seizing frozen Russian assets in Europe, which is not a good signal.
Yeah, so this procrastination from time to time, it really brings always this risk of credibility, and also enlargement cannot be under the risk of credibility, because I think enlargement has been the smartest, the most important policy of the European Union along its history, because that's exactly what benefited the world actually, because it's not only that the union will be bigger, but it's also that the world will get a huge territory where there is a democracy, which now I think we should fight for every piece of territory to have it as a democracy.
Is there anything that we need to address ourselves within the European Union when we see the lack of compliance with the rules that everybody agreed to when they joined? They haven't changed. We don't really have much prospect for changing any treaties because that would be, I think, almost impossible at the moment. Is there any way that we can bring pressure to bear on those member states, existing member states, that I think of Hungary most notably? Maybe things will change in Hungary come the spring, but how do we avoid being held in a position of a stranglehold by these member states?
Actually, the beginning is that it's really incredible and unexpected that we can have all those who signed the treaty, who made the commitment to respect the rule of law and to respect in general the rules on which European integration has been built from the same people. In case of Hungary, for example, this is the same leader, I think, that signed the accession treaty, no? Because if I remember correctly. And then they just stopped because they don't have appetite for it anymore. They have a different political interest because they build their capital they look for things on which they can build, and they discover that Europe helps them to build. Being against Europe just allows them to bring sort of bigger groups of people to vote for them, and they do it. So and Europe, I mean, with the changes to the last, how many years ago it was already, during the COVID time, when we also introduced this new regulation, which is penalizing for lack of respect of European law, let's call it in general terms, you can lose the money. So that's what, it doesn't work because we are...
But it still appears toothless. So to sum up, going forward, I mean, all great empires crumble, and I would really not like to see the European Union join the fate of ancient empires. But is there any one thing that you think that we need to do as Europeans today to ensure that the European project becomes and remains viable in the future?
I think there are many things that we need to do. First of all, the good thing is that with COVID, I think more or less we started to think strategically, because normally we were always in the mood of crisis management because things were happening, small things, so we were just solving these things and we were moving forward, very often with very big things, because Europe is history of change actually. The history of Europe, it's not only small steps every day, but from time to time we agreed on big things like Euro, like Schengen, like many other single market and enlargement. Every time it was also unanimity. So we have capacity to agree. But there are so many things that just work against this unity that I think the most important thing is now, I think, the unity of the European Union, which means unity among the member states, which means sharing the same objectives, thinking strategically, which we are just doing. I think right now we are, I would even say that we are good in making relations. And I think that the time ahead of us is time for relations that we have to establish, and we started to do it, establish relations also with other democracies, with other like-minded countries. So this is something which we just have to do. But then a lot of small things which require political reforms, which is change the way we are legislating, change also the way we are making decisions. Why should we have this?
The key takeaway is that we need to maintain those relations. Professor, thank you for your insight, your unique perspective, and thank you for joining me today on Between the Lines.
Thank you, Urszula. Thank you.